it became very obvious to me that like musicians should specialize and be the best they can be in terms of the music, but that doesn't necessarily parlay into like.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Music Business Podcast. Today we do not have Sam Heisel because he actually had a medical emergency, so I'm going to handle the intro and outro and episode myself today. But I'm really, really excited to announce my guest today, who is Dominic Flannigan. He's a co-founder of a record label called LuckyMe. Now, for those who don't know, LuckyMe is a label that's based in the UK. I'm sure you guys are familiar with some of their artists: Baauer, Hudson Mohawke, Jacques Green, Tonight, Cashmere Cat, and the list goes on. So super excited to get him on. We go through a little bit of the LuckyMe history, kind of, what came about LuckyMe when it started, as early as when they found Hudson Mohawke in 2002, how they built that relationship, and a lot of what we get into today, in addition to Baauer's nomination for Best Dance Electronic Album for Planetsmath, we get into what it's like in those early stages, building a label from the ground up. We get into how they've kind of had this really super strong brand for artists that are quote unquote left field and how they've been adopted to the mainstream. And we talk about generally label structure and how that kind of can differ from a small, nimble company to a much larger company. The conversation that we had today is super fun. I lost track of time in the middle of it a few times because of the back and forth that we were able to have. And we ended up speaking for 30 minutes again outside of the episode, after it ended, just to kind of give you an idea of the energy that I felt and that he felt. So super excited for people to hear this. Super excited for people to listen to it. LuckyMe is a legendary label, and super, super glad that we got him on. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, Dom, thank you, man. Thank you so much for coming out virtually, man. We really appreciate it. Sam couldn't be here today because he broke his collarbone. I'll say that in the intro and outro. But yeah, he's recovering. But super, super excited to get you on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Of course. And where are you located at this moment?
So I'm in London.
Awesome.
I've been in London for 10 years now. The record label started in Scotland, but we moved here a long time ago.
Yeah, London's one of my favorite cities. It's one of those places that reminds me of New York, but you're still close to, Rome, Paris, Florence, all these places that take an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to, but from New York they take like 8.
Yeah, I never take advantage of that. I really should do that more.
When things come back, man, that's what you got to do. That's what you got to do.
Time.
Cool. So I guess and obviously a lot of this will overlap with your experience at LuckyMe, but one thing we like to ask guests in the beginning, just to kind of get a primer on where they come from, but also to give people kind of a little more guidance to how they enter the music industry. Like, what would you consider your first big break in the music industry? And that may overlap with the first big break at LuckyMe, or you may have had something before.
The first big break in the music industry for us, I would probably qualify this. It's an interesting one. There's a few. We all made music together before we launched the record label. So that would be myself and my partner, Martin Flynn, and Hudson Mohawke and Mike Slott. So the four of us were making music together in Glasgow. And so we had some wins when we were making music just as artists.
Right.
But the first sort of significant one for the record label, I think you would have said, would win our first release, which is the Hudson Mohawke Says Oops release, which is like these R&B like bootleg sort of like Hudmo flipping some like old crunk records and R&B records. And it was our first release. We distributed it from Glasgow. And then that just like sold out super quick. And it was like the first time that you got that inkling that maybe there was a living to be made in this. And then I guess there's been like significant milestones along the way. Hudson Mohawke signing to Warp, which made for our proximity to Warp as a company and ultimately led to the partnership with Warp that we have. But it's all been fairly a steady trajectory set by that first record. I would say that's our first win.
Right. Awesome. How did you guys get connected with Hudson Mohawke, just out of curiosity?
He was in a scratch contest when he was like 15. It was like the local ITFs. And was it ITF or DMC? I think it was ITFs he won. And I went to see it as like a fan of hip hop at the time and was into that sort of thing. And Martin, who was like my best bud, we went to the show together. And Hudmo was just the hot shit youngest guy on there. But the sensibility of stuff he was playing was really different to everyone else. So, like scratch contest stuff at the time was really, I mean, there was just loads of battle breaks and loads of loops and stuff like that. But he was going up there and playing loads of big jiggy records and cutting over them and stuff. And
That's
like played Ludacris and stuff like that. And
he was 15, you said?
Yeah, and he was incredible. He was so good. And he's totally styled it at the time. And I think I just went over to him afterwards and just told him how good it was. I mean, this is like the Scottish regionals. I think he went on to win the UK at that, and he was like the youngest person to win the UK TMC, I think.
That's awesome.
And this is like before he was really Hudson Mohawke. He was still TNGHT or something, like a scratch name. And then I just moved to Glasgow from Edinburgh. So I grew up in Edinburgh, which is the capital, 40 miles away from Glasgow. And then I went to study at art school. So I was like 18. And then I started a little hip hop night and I asked him to be the DJ. And so he would still be like 15, 16. And so we had to like sneak him in and he would like play records all night. And it was more of like a hip hop open mic thing.
Right.
In a tiny, tiny little bar. And that was the first time we ever used the LuckyMe name was on that. It was the name for that club night.
Oh, damn. That's awesome. Which kind of leads me
to like 2002.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
So you've known him and been working with him like over half his life.
Yeah, I mean, we were teenagers. We have. Yeah, we've all known each other a long time.
That's awesome. Which kind of leads me to my next question. What was the vision for LuckyMe when it started, and how has it been manifested since then? I mean, I know you guys are in a few different things. You guys have an art studio as well, right? So like, how does it expand from, this 15-year-old producer to kind of what it is now?
It's always just been a way of like, I mean, it's still in the DNA of the company that we have at like a policy level is just like complete equity and no division from the staff to the artists. And I mean that in terms of like, we're always trying to make careers for everyone that's involved with it. So the objective was always just like, damn, we are so far away from the center of the music industry. How the hell do we make a living doing this? We're in love with this art. Like, how do we dedicate ourselves to that? And so, what was the question? I guess we all just started doing it ourselves, our damn selves, from like miles away from any seat of industry or anyone that could tell us what the deals ought to look like. And we just sort of tiptoed into it. What was your question?
What was the vision when it started and how does it operate now?
The vision was just, make a living, pay rent. You know? And now it's about what that means. And the idea that maybe we're successful at this and like sort of adjusting that, and how do you build it into some sort of infrastructure that supports like more people being involved with it and breaking outside of the original proposition of this, which was, it used to be very tribal. It was just me and my friends, and it was us like making a brand for ourselves. And now it's like, actually, I'm getting older, Martin's getting older, and it's like, what do we think? Like, how do we make this into a useful conceit that can facilitate whatever would come after the point that we want to be in the club? I think that's like where I'm at now, as I like stare ahead at 40. You know what I mean? I'm like 37 right now, and I'm thinking like, I want LuckyMe to be here in 50 years. What does that mean? So that's kind of the MO right now. I'm never overlooking this idea that you've kind of got this sort of dual responsibility, of course, to the artist, but also the people that work with you.
Right. And there's something I want to highlight there, which is, you said your vision at first was just to like pay rent and essentially enjoy what you were doing. And I think that with the advent of social media and everything like that, everyone has gotten into this like comparing game of when they start a label, they want to be the next, Warner Music Group or things like that. But, even the way your origin story started with Hudson Mohawke, it all started from, this is just a super dope person. Like, let's see what we can do and like build from there. And, I get questions a lot about technically how to start labels, which will lead me to my next question, but how to start labels or what's some things that you should be looking after. And obviously that's what we're going to get into a little bit today so people can get on the right foot immediately. But at the same time, there also has to be a little bit of lack of structure and just going after what you want and just having a good time with finding art that you truly believe in. I was just speaking with someone the other day. One of like the deadly things about the music industry, I think, is that people can forget where it all started, which is them being a fan. I would implore people that are kind of having these conversations with me to also think about where their fandom is before they start a label, before they work with an artist, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. I guess I've always had this feeling, or I had a very quick realization when I was making music with the guys who went on to be known as musicians, was that it takes a lot of time and alternative skills to do. I was just like intuitively the guy that designed the MySpace, and then you find yourself like, oh right, shit, I've just made a career out of being that guy.
Yeah.
But it became very obvious to me that like musicians should specialize and be the best they can be in terms of the music, but that doesn't necessarily parlay into like understanding the outside context of how their music should be interpreted or communicated or marketed, and that there was scope to do a good job of that, and that in itself would be as good a contribution as one could make to the art. And so there's like another part of it, and I think that's something that's as the narrative of like being a true like independent without a label and being like lone wolf and being responsible for all facets of your work has like become like a big issue in the music industry. For me, I've always been a bit cynical of that, I think, because I was always like, well, Hudmo just wants to make music, actually. He's not really fussed on all these other aspects. And like through that relationship, just as friends, I fell into all these other responsibilities. And now it's like, but I don't make that like clear delineation of like all the art is happening over here. And then there's all this objective like other decision making and structure for music, and the record label is a service and it needs to work for its value, and it needs to give that back to the artist.
Exactly.
You do that by having an understanding of like audiences and like how the music will probably be interpreted. And I think that is like takes a nuance. It's like, in a way, I don't want the artist to be like staring at their phone, knowing necessarily how things are doing. I want them to just feel a certain creative freedom. Yeah. And we can facilitate it another way. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but that's kind of how I've been thinking of it. And it's like, I think just being really close to the art, even in terms of the marketing and the creative that we make. Right,
exactly. I totally agree. Which kind of leads me to my next thing. Like when you're starting a label, obviously, hindsight's 2020, and some of this will be more clear now than when you started many years ago. But what are the first few departments or roles that you need to start a business and a record label in general, just for people who may want to kind of hit the ground running on starting their own sort of venture?
I'm so aware when you ask me a question like that I've not, I've had very limited jobs in the music industry because I've always done the same thing, and it feels like a very direct path of progress to where we are now. The point that I became familiar with the roles of a record label, besides like reading Passman and like reading occasional books when I was a teenager to try and understand what the music industry was, my first experience was being landed as an A&R at Warp Records in London. And actually the guy that employed me was off on the week that I started. So it was just me sat in the office, and I knew individuals in the room, but I was trying to work out whoever, like on that week they were launching the Grizzly Bear album and Flying Lotus Until the Quiet Comes. And I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing as an A&R there. And trying to understand like, okay, that's the product manager. What does that mean? Because LuckyMe had operated for, I think like 3 or 4 years kind of properly, just ourselves, like just doing, you're the guy that does whatever needs done. You don't give it a name. You're not the head of international. You just happen to have the relationship with the guy in France or whatever. We didn't give ourselves titles until that point. We had just always done it. So I would say for people who are starting out is to approach it the way that we did, which is just this sort of, everyone's going to have their natural places where they feel more confident, and to follow your own skill set, and then just try and like get in there. If your value is not I would have said like for us, it was the design and the sort of the early marketing that we could bring to projects that would make them steal people's attention quickly. But if you were just like an email warrior, then there's other ways that you could be out there like procuring opportunity for the artist. So you would just be like an A&R from the jump, really.
Right.
Maybe that's a good answer. It's just like, it just starts with creative. So it starts with the music. It starts with the musical identity of what you're doing. And just the ears, I guess.
Yeah. When I worked at EQT, I actually, we didn't have titles for almost the entire time that I was there because it was sort of a similar sort of type thing where it was, what do we have to do to help this artist succeed and to get their art to as many people as possible, and then kind of lean into your strengths. And the result of that was a bunch of people saying that they did a bunch of different things, but it all worked, because we all leaned in on our strengths, and it kind of grew from there.
Yeah, man, I love that. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it's the scale of the team. We're currently working with like 5 people on the smallest stuff that we do. And then depending on the bigger projects, it scales up in all the divisions of work. So it can go up to like 10 or 12 people, I would have said, for Baauer's album. But on the sort of day-to-day of LuckyMe, it's a very small team. And so it has to be expected that some of the roles are fluid. It's like, all right, we can switch this live, someone can jump in and do it. We all need to have the keys to do that. And so we don't make these like hardline divisions, but I'm aware that like when you bring in young people into the company as well, I sort of, as much as I say I want everyone to be like a rock star and capable of like doing all these different things, it can also give them like no mentorship and sort of no focus in terms of what they need to specialize in. So now I'm trying to learn a bit more about giving people clearer responsibilities.
Yeah.
So just making the sort of place that I'd want to work for that gives you the opportunity to offer a creative opinion. But, I'm trying to give people like more honed responsibilities. In the past, it's been like, okay, there's my boy in New York and he just runs America for Lucky. And you just have to do America's our biggest market. There's one person in New York. It's like, all right. But I think that's pretty impractical, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I feel you. Cool. So I kind of want to shift now to LuckyMe as a brand and the type of artists that you guys work with. I know that's the bread and butter of kind of LuckyMe as a whole is the type of artists you sign and the general energy and culture that you feel from the records that you guys release in such a real awesome, unique sort of way. So I guess my first question is like, we talked a little bit about Hudson Mohawke, but like Baauer, Cashmere Cat, all these guys are obviously very respected in their fields. In addition to, a lot of the other artists that you guys have signed. What do you kind of see in the artists you sign or want to sign? And that may be a complex question, but then we can ask follow-up questions and have a good time kind of tackling that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question for us. It's a bit of a bold statement, but I think I am looking for like a degree of virtuosity in artists that I work with. Like I need to know the best.
Right.
And that's a fluid idea, but like I need to know that like this isn't just like maybe a demo that's been forwarded to me and it sort of piques my interest because it feels like it's something I've not heard of before. But like I think being an A&R since I guess like formally for like 10 years, I'm looking to the second and third idea, and I want to know that they've got more behind that first great record, really. And I think something that, I just need to know it's not all aesthetics. Do you know what I mean by that? It's not just it's not just this sort of veneer of like incredible production, Ableton tricks that would like potentially time out if they change software. I want to know that they're thinking in terms of music in a sort of in a broader sense beyond whatever their tools might be, even if that's piano or voice. Do you know what I mean? I think I'm always like, and they need to understand like a connection to culture too, which is an intuitive thing, which you can generally pick up just from a conversation with someone that they understand like where their music fits in, what its purpose is. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. It's funny that you say you also ask for more music because I remember when I started working in the music industry, I would send artists to the co-founder of my company and he'd be like, "Oh, this is tight. Like, can you send something else?" And at first I didn't really understand why he asked that. I was like, "Yo, this album is great. It's awesome. Like, what else is there to listen to?"
It sounds like you're deferring, right?
Exactly.
Like, keep proving it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But you also need to see what that trajectory looks like for the artist too. So not just like, this one album they put out, this one song they put out, but what does that next step look like for them? And trying to get an idea as early as you can what that next step look like for them. Because he would always be like, "Yo, reach out and see if you could get any unreleased records." And then I would get like kind of nervous. I'd be like, "Damn, you want me to reach out to this artist and see if they'll send me unreleased records?" But that's what he was trying to do, right? He was investigating. So I think that makes like total sense.
Yeah, it's about like just checking yourself for like at some point in the artist's career, they're bound to have like, a degree of self-consciousness about like where this goes next. If everyone does their job well and you get them to where they deserve to be off that sort of first idea, what turns them into a career artist.
Right.
The deals that we do, they're long-term investments, and it's about building a career together. So I want to know that you want to have a career in music in 10 years. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
I want to know where this goes after like a successful first album. And you don't have to know that now. If you're speaking to a 17-year-old, of course they'd be a psycho if they said, and it would be really off-putting if like someone young had it all mapped out. That would be really kind of unfun as well. But because the idea is that like we'll be in a different place because we'll be responding to whatever's popping culturally at that point as well, and they will be in a different place, and you want to be able to grow together. But I think for me it helps to know that maybe they have like some primary inspiration that's not just like looking sideways at what's going on right now in the timeline or what's relevant right now, but they're thinking that they've kind of got some roots in music that is beyond this moment. Basically, I think that's a really important one. That they can play some instruments is a good one for, in particular, and this will be different from more of the vocalist stuff that we'll work with in the future, and like these different types of artists. But the bread and butter of what LuckyMe's been has been producers, and it's always been useful there that beyond just being killer producers, they can play, and that's been like another metric that kind of like I've sussed out with new signings early is if because you're not going to get writer's block if you are really competent.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to kind of base what that next step looks like with artists is, if you can't sit down and take what's in your mind and put it on a keyboard or put it in a production software, then it's kind of like a ticking time bomb until you run out of ideas for that lane, or you're no longer inspired in that lane. That's super interesting, especially because, we see a lot of labels now kind of look at like they'll do the work of seeing, okay, does this artist have legs, but not necessarily does this artist just like know music? Like, do they just know music theory? Do they know how to actually like play a piano and know the keys that they're playing, those sort of things? It's definitely a way to go. And I think you see that in the versatility of your artists, like the general, I've been listening to Hudson Mohawke for over a decade, and the general sound of where he's gone has been able to change in the way that he wants it to change, because you can hear that he knows music. You can feel that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, he did have a bit of music theory, but he didn't take it beyond high school. He did like an essay course as well. But this is all like, he's very low key and quite humble about that stuff, because it's just like a normal like public school education in Glasgow. So but I knew him for like 3 years before he was like, "Oh yeah, I did a bit of drums at school." And I was like, well, that's why your fills are crazy. Like, and it's little observations, like he's got like a little sticky that's just like chord progressions and stuff that he likes, that he'll take note if he hears something on the radio or whatever. Like, he is thinking in a way that I don't, a lot of people in his genre aren't really thinking like, and he's just, and that sets him out. And like another example is in like 2015 or something, well, maybe even earlier, going to Sophie's studio in King's Cross and her playing like all these like almost like classic rock 70s Elton John ballads. But like the music that was coming out as like early Sophie was, of course, like absolutely insane, that shit. but like there was an integrity behind that music that I think everyone can sort of tune into. It's like, all right, this person's really thinking about like songwriting. Actually.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Which I like. I don't want to like condition myself to like just be looking for these like really classical references. Of course, that's not what we do. We put a lot of fruity new dance music, and I'm always inspired by the underground, and I'm always inspired by what's bubbling and what's innovative. But I guess like if we're doing it for the long haul, I just need to know that we're investing in someone that's like really is thinking like that.
Yeah, and invested in the art. And it may not necessarily translate to they have a degree from such and such a school in music theory.
Hell no.
Definitely not.
Absolutely
you know what I mean?
No.
But it's also like you're saying, the way that they're just thinking about the art in itself is super important.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I read an article in The Fader from 2015 where you guys mentioned that LuckyMe is almost a genre in itself. So how do you think that genre has changed over time? And if it has, how has the process changed to identify the artists that kind of align with the genre, so to speak?
Wow. Big statement there. Are you sure you said that? I don't know if we would say that.
I mean, if you want to, if that's not true, I don't have to ask that question. That's fine.
No, it's absolutely, it's all good. I think people do put us on a certain shelf, and the artists that we work with all fit beside each other. And because we do emphasize like family and the way that all the artists intersect so much, that facilitates this thing that it's like a LuckyMe sound. But
yeah, I'll tell you exactly what you said, so I didn't botch it. You said LuckyMe as an idea is the genre. There you go.
That's a pretentious thing I would definitely say. Yeah, I mean, look, we are into hip hop as a sort of the street that we live on, like in terms of like the references for everything that we have come from hip hop, jazz, and black music classically.
Yeah,
but like what is coming out is I was trying to find our place and our contribution to it that would feel suitably unique and contemporary, and it tends to come out with this sort of extra twist of like electronic music and stuff, the design that we bring to it, and being from like nowhere near any rappers. That was a big thing for a long time. It was just like why it was so fruity and so crazy was because we were filling up the entire song ourselves because we couldn't get vocalists. And all these conditions, or Jacques Green, even in terms of dance music, why there's lots of sort of mess with R&B vocals there is because he didn't know the vocalist. If he knew the vocalist, he'd be making his own weekend tape.
Yeah, so, that's crazy.
And for us, it was about proximity to the vocalists. And like, with all respect to all the Scottish hip hop guys that I came up with in that early club night, none of them were like, "Oh, you're phenomenal." You're like, but I was still like on the jock of all the US independent hip hop that was into it. So for us, like we end up being understood as electronic music, but I think I wouldn't claim it. I don't know much about it really. It's for us, it's always been this thing of like, I mean, when I was reading music mags like 15 years ago, you would always hear like Public Enemy, or LP, Company Flow, stuff like that. Was all like hip hop's meant to sound different every year. That's built into the project. And if you're saying we're too weird to be understood as like centrist hip hop, well, tough. You're wrong. Like you're not getting what hip hop is. Hip hop isn't a formula. It's an aesthetic. It's an idea of like what. It's a response to like what DIY music is now. Yeah. And I would say like, well, that's kind of what we do. It's like we're dealing with samples, we're dealing with the software that's available to us, and we're trying to break it, fuck with it, make something that's responding to it. So I see us within a lineage of that.
Right. Absolutely.
Sorry, I can't remember what the question. Yeah, it was about the genre. The genre for me, I don't know if anyone cares, but if anyone ever asked us like what we were making, we always said hip hop, probably to our detriment, because no one relates to it. They probably don't, anyone that feels like they are like the defining voice on what hip hop is would probably say you're absolutely not. Yeah. But for me, that was like way cooler and way more credible to be like, no, actually, I've just listened to that. and what we make is just our own version of it, than to be like, this is trap music and it's our own subgenre of this, it's wave or whatever you want to call it. I think that's been a really short-termist thing. The dance music in America in particular, that's to do with like trend cycles and the commodity of these things and the burn rate of like 2 years of touring. So us, we're like, nah, that's not really what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make records we're just trying to make a new Clips album.
Yeah.
Like, honestly. So it's like, I'm saying that's quite reductive. That's not fair of like some of the signings we have now who are not trying to make a new Clips album. But like, in terms of like where this started and the sort of idea
in the origin,
that's what we were thinking about, really.
Right.
So as far as, we've always been really reluctant of like, people called it aqua crunk when Rusty started like fusing bits of like Detroit techno with hip hop and crunk and stuff like that. And certainly in the club we were playing loads of like southern hip hop. But people threw names at us and we've just kind of swerved them.
Right.
The trap music thing was like a big one for us, obviously. And if we had like, followed that, I think we wouldn't have had such long careers, really.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of energy that somebody like me and I'm sure other fans of the label feel, is that you guys are kind of riding your own path and not really confined to boxes or anything like that. Like the brand is so strong for that, which kind of leads me to my next point. Like, the artists that you guys work with, and, forgive me for my naivete if this sounds ignorant or whatever, but they're more likely considered left field than not for a good amount of people on purpose, right? I mean, like you just said, you're avoiding genre statements and you're avoiding being put in a box. And when I say left field, I mean it in the best way possible.
No,
in this situation.
Absolutely. Right? I don't think I feel comfortable with pop.
Right, exactly. So how do you take artists that are seemingly quote unquote left field and present them to the mainstream in a way that you have, and have the mainstream actually absorb those artists? You've had all your artists collaborate with people like Kanye West, and at the same time kind of be absorbed in this way where, like I told you over email, my last night in Paris in 2015 was at a Cashmere Cat show, and it was packed out with people from all different colors and creeds, and people, at my school that were in my study abroad program. A lot of them were listening to pop music, but at the same time, we were all at that Cashmere Cat show, right? Like, how do you position
That's
artists
amazing.
like that in a way to, while they're remaining themselves and quote unquote left field, be absorbed by such a large audience like you have,
We always like just double down on difference and novelty, and it takes an awareness of like the way that every other similar label or artist or is handling similar music to us. We will just always try and find something that's very idiosyncratic, brand identity for the artist that is their own. So for Magnus Cashmere Cat, we really worked with him on like what his references were. They were like, at the time, no one knew what he looked like. If he was a he was very shy. He didn't want press. We didn't run press images. We ran press images for like photos of friends of his. The record cover, we made it so close to just pure black by setting a black and white image really dark that it was just really quiet, and just trusted that that's what that guy needed at that time. And like really worked on a logo form that was like a classic kind of serif typeface that felt totally different from everyone else at the time. And when you've done the work well, because generally when people go on, like he's gone on to his deal with Benny, and that logo form still shows up every now and again. And that's like, right, cool. Well, I did a good thing there. They can carry that forward. It's about positioning in a unique way, and that's not going to be new to any listener to this podcast. And the difference between doing it well and doing it badly are just down to like how intelligent are the team working on it, or how nuanced are they to identify that. But for me, the only education I had formally in anything music or anything music adjacent, well, it wasn't music, it was design. So I studied communication. I was thinking about graphic design. When we came up, we were like, music blogs were a thing, MySpace was a thing, and everything was Aglow, everything was like new rave looking. Lunas was wearing like an all over print snood, like everything was very based. And the way that we found like a point of difference for what we were doing is we just made this thing look like a museum identity, like tightened it up. We made it more formal. When we communicated at a time where everything felt really like, you know, kind of low rent, disposable, fun, like respect for it being fun. We made it, our stuff try and look like it was a bit tighter. We took like, our first flyer for our club was like Soulja Boy photoshopped, or Hurricane Chris photoshopped into Samori Shisato lookbook. You know what I mean? That relationship of like, we're going to take our references and we're going to handle it like it's something people need to respect and pay attention to. So we just tried to make it look like we were a bit more of an institution. We had our shit together. And I don't think there's anything that anyone can sort of glean from that, really. It's just that, like, it's something we're thinking about all the time. And part of the conversation and part of the process is like, what's everyone else doing? What's right for them? How do we position it differently, and sort of trust in that? And I think naturally when you're sort of taking like an electronic kind of pop producer like Cashmere Cat and what he was trying to do, and bringing in all these like references of like classic kind of new wave cinema and shit like that.
Right.
That aesthetically is opening it up to like all these other fans, and might speak to that idea of like when you went to Social Club and saw him play, it maybe just appeals to people in a different way, whereas everything else is still being ridiculously sort of defined by genre and other aesthetics. It's like, we're like, yeah, I mean, but there's so much more like that can inspire something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm ranting. I hope this is helpful in any way.
No, we love ranting here at the Music Business Podcast. It's you know, it's funny that you say that, because this is probably like the 3rd or 4th episode in a row someone has said like, I'm rambling, but that's exactly that's the conversation we're having. You know what I mean? That's exactly.
Every time we've listened to these, they're so like vocational and direct and to the point in terms of strategy, and I'm just saying like, we don't have a lot of strategy.
to be real, Sam, you know, before we record episodes, he's like, let's get super tactical. And I'm always the one that's like, yo, but let's also get to know the story. And that's how we kind of balance each other. So this is me trying to be more tactical.
So but at the same time, like,
I'm like, bro, this is exactly the episode I want. Like, whatever, Sam. You know, I'm kidding. But yeah, that's kind of the general energy of how we balance things out. But honestly, you know, lack of strategy is a strategy too, in a lot of ways. So I think whatever y'all are doing, it's working. and you saying whatever you're doing, whether or not that goes into the confines of traditional strategy, is a point in itself. So, you know.
Thank you. You're an absolute gentleman. Yeah, no, I think it's like potentially what we're doing, and always sort of trusting in sort of the latest sort of avant-garde idea, or constantly like going back into the well of like finding like new artists that are sort of being progressive, means that your progress is like steady, and you're really building these like diehard fans.
Right.
But it's hard to compete in a culture that's like everything's so visibly kind of numerical in terms of like socials and stuff like that. Like we're not popping like that. We have our core. We know who that is, and we know that every few years we're going to have one of those touchstone moments where we change things again. And that's exactly what we want to do. That's who we are. That's what we're doing.
That's awesome.
But I appreciate it doesn't. It's a completely different model, I think, to like breaking something out of TikTok.
Yeah, and that's something that you can do when, you know, the company is 5, you know, varies between 5 to 10 people. It's like kind of stay nimble and move with what's working. So
100%.
So for the artists on your roster that have collaborated with like these huge US acts, you know, Ariana Grande, Kanye West, I guess for, you know, how does some of those things come together? Like, what does that look like? You know, you're doing your own thing. Is it at that point, is it like, you know, how do you get in the room with some of those people? Are they reaching out, or is it, you know, what does that A&R process look like?
It's changed quite a lot, that game, over the last 5 years, because I used to have a much more tactical role in terms of like doing a lot more of the song procurement on behalf of the producer talent that we were working with. And being the guy that like Hudmo would be like, can you try and explore this collaboration? And just trying to find my way through like the art of writing the good one-line email to the manager. But now more and more I'm seeing less of that collaboration process happening through A&Rs and through management. Actually, it's artists are leading this themselves through DM. And I guess for me, it's much more about like trying to build that confidence. And also I think it has a different job on the back end of the song being cut, because when they've got that kinship between each other and they've done like a meaningful collab and they've built it that way through their own communication.
Yeah.
That's sending parts remotely, but they've like cut the song, they've been speaking about it, they've made few changes to it. And before I'm hearing it, I'm much more remote from the process now. I'm hearing it, it's a song that both parties are really happy with. The buy-in's already there on the collaboration, and that's really helped us. But in the past, it was just like, how short and impactful an email can I write? And it was like learning that signing off with yours sincerely to certain managers is just getting you nowhere. You know what I mean? Like, that smile and handshake your way into the industry was really tough. And the few like, I mean, I would argue that like alongside just trying to find your way with that, finding that language for those collaborations has just been also making sure that you're also doing your own thing and you're building a compelling brand, because it's that quality that people are attracted to. And we see this every day. This is very intuitive to everyone. I'm sure that like if an artist has a brand, then the collaborations somewhat facilitate themselves, because people understand the sort of aura around the music and they go, all right, I want that sonic quality. Like there's something I really want from S-Type. I'm going to him for it. You know, I want a big anthemic like banger, basically. Like that's the guy that makes that thing.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, yeah. So is that a bit of a cop-out to say like I just tell them to Instagram DM people?
No, it's not. I think
more that's like what's happening.
I think if anything, it points to the fact that people really need to have solidified and strong brands, and may point to the content that you put out on social media helping solidify that brand. So those Instagram DMs come with a punch, as opposed to it seeming like it's seemingly from a random person, which is how it's changed. It's changed the relationship I know of between a few managers and their artists, and what the managers do versus what they used to do, and it changing over time makes complete sense. And
there's definitely like we'll still reach out on behalf of this stuff, but I see it more about there's still a lot of work to be done from the point there's consensus that making a record, I'll still like work with someone on like an album and be like, right, what features are you thinking? Okay, what about this person? What about this person adding keys? Blah, blah. And I'll help steer the project or influence the project or build it out. That's probably a better way of putting it. It's just kind of fill out the idea for the collaborator be. Then I would ask the artist to lead on the outreach, but I'm here to make sure the deal's in place, to make sure the manager feels secure about the follow-up with it, and know that the team is tight and that it's going to be a well-orchestrated rollout. So then that is a part of it. And that's really all the manager wants to know, right? Is that like the communication is going to be good. And I'm definitely there for that. I just don't think like from sat here, just sending emails out, I don't think you cut records, because the proximity of the manager to the artist is so remote now, or the A&R to the artist, that they're just not setting the timesheet.
Right.
The artist, if the artist is going to write that song and actually follow something through, they're not doing it for the advance. They're not like, I just think, or maybe it's just the type of artist that I'm reaching out to. I think if you're reaching out to like big rappers, they're actually not doing it for the money. They're probably doing fine. You know what I mean? I think like they're doing it because they understand like what creatively the projects ought to be.
Right.
I think that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I guess the last point I really want to hit on is Baauer's nomination for a Grammy, Planetsmath. It's funny. I was trying to think of the questions I could ask about this, but there's obviously so many questions you can ask about a campaign for an album that results in a Grammy nomination. So I guess from the perspective of LuckyMe, how did some of the marketing come together for it in order to cultivate into something like this? And what do you think were the inflection points in that campaign that kind of paved the way for this nomination?
This year's given us like a rare focus to the project, and it's been we have had other projects to work on. We had this like score for an HBO series called Industry, and I mean, there's been other albums. I'm looking at the release schedule, but we had all the parts delivered for Planetsmath before we went into it. It was already a provocative title for that album, pre-pandemic, you know, and it was kind of like, it was a demo name of a track that Harry had. And we just thought, that's it, that's the album name. That's like, where did he even pull that from? But of course, he just made a crazy record, and it felt kind of anarchic. And we were just like, this speaks to this moment, even pre-pandemic, in terms of what was going on politically.
Yeah.
And it just, I just thought people would resonate to it. And he was like keen to stress, this isn't like a political project, but like it's speaking to something like kind of broader. And then he came with this whole sci-fi story that he'd worked on with his brother, a sort of premise of like a movie of like another planet appearing above the Earth. And this whole sci-fi story that comes from these like wacky aliens, and an alien for every song sort of thing. So he was really like doing work on like world building, and we had this record delivered, and we had an outline of like basically realizing this world for a visual album before the pandemic. So we commissioned, we had our animators up to the studio when we were writing it, because we just knew what we were making. So that would have been like February 2009 with the first projects, and then we finished the project in the summer. Then we had like 5-6 months of commissioning, really like understood what the marketing timeline would be around November. And that's when we were getting delivery of the visual album. And then worked like all this year on the sort of rollout for this thing. That the story of it in lockdown has very much been about community. You know, it's been fan first, and it's been about Harry on Twitch making a new diehard audience. I think before this campaign, like people knew of Baauer, but they didn't know his personality. They didn't know he was like such an affable, smart guy that was just like a total natural to the platform of like speaking direct to fans. You knew that from sitting in the studio with him, that there's never a dull moment. He's constantly sort of talking. He's just one of the happiest people I know. And that's been a really sort of necessary energy for fans this year. You know, he's built a community around it through Discord, through Twitch. And I think in another year, we wouldn't have pivoted quite so appropriately. You know, I think like the time it's afforded us and the focus it's afforded us has really benefited the project, because it's not been about those like tempo videos dropping. On release day, we dropped a visual album that's 45 minutes long. And, you know, it's going to do its thing. It impacted as it should, but the music videos along the way were being buried. Music press were on furlough. The pre-release campaign was barely responding. What was responding, where all the energy was with a fan base in Twitch and in Discord. And I think they've really carried the project, and they've, you know, Harry has worked hard to give this project intention for the fans. So it becomes like a cultural, like a bit of a meme, the idea of like what Planetsmath was, and the whole world around it was so rich. We had all these like Pokemon cards, and like I place so much importance on the small stuff on this one, because it's like, that's the stuff that people connected with. It's the stuff in the background of the music video that we talked about. Like, what does that mark on the wall mean? What does that graffiti mean? That's the stuff that's like, that time and depth in the creative has allowed people to talk about and discuss it for much longer. And has given a longer tail to the project. And then because he's like regularly on Twitch, it keeps purposing and surfacing the music. And then we've come with remixes and secondary stuff, the Twitch tape that we just dropped. We had this like offering of like a second phase campaign. But in response of like, we'd pulled our release date for the protests in respect to George Floyd and everything that was going on internationally. And we observed days here, obviously, but we were just kind of thinking about like, what do we do with the company? And all this stuff was happening over our first dedicated release date. And so we've had to be like really responsive to what's happening in the culture, because it's a hectic time. I think in 2019, I would have argued that Twitter and Instagram are no longer very purposeful for music, that migration out of them for music is just, it's just the bad tools for what we need them to do, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the tone of conversation on Twitter has become politics, and Instagram has become a shop and influencer marketing. Neither of these things really facilitate integration with music very well. And this year, more than ever, it's like, I don't think people were going to those big social platforms for consumption of music in the same way. I think they had a different purpose to people. So it was like, right, let's shut up, let's get out of the way, and let's go somewhere else.
Right. I love it when, a couple of our episodes speak to each other. And I think that what you kind of mentioned about building this community is exactly what our episode about the Grammy process kind of solidifies also. We asked Shannon Herber about, she works for the Grammys, like what can people do to kind of be in front of potential voters? And she said the exact same thing: be a part of the community. Like do as much as you can to get to know your audience, get to know the people in the music industry at large. And I think a lot of that aligns with what you guys have done. You mentioned Twitch, live streaming, and Twitch is all about, obviously, building a community and supporting that community. And it seems like it worked super well for the album.
It's not necessarily like a model for everyone, but it's the model for him, right? It's
right.
Like some people aren't eligible for that. They're not like capable.
Yeah.
All the skills, like the stuff that you can't teach Baauer,
right.
He's just good at in that platform. It's like, it's suitable for him. So we owe a lot of it to him. And of course, the music's great on that project. The creative is incredible. And I do think that's helped. And I think also being a small team, when we came out, we put out the record, we spent longer than we should have putting together our second phase. But we hadn't given up on the targets of a Grammy. It was it was at the beginning of the year we were thinking about, like, the references on the record were all like very older dance acts like Fatboy Slim and Chemical Brothers and stuff like that. And we were like, right, well, what makes a crossover dance record now? Because dance music lives in like these very defined columns of like support in terms of the services, and like the idea of like, you don't have an MTV dance act now. You don't have a crossover dance act that's like indie fans and hip hop fans listening to this as their one dance record. That's not really how things are exposed. So like, how do we put Baauer in that place?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so we kind of got the second phase together that was about all these remixes and a sort of deluxe edition, a DVD edition of the album. And we have walked this Grammy nomination through the committee, I think, just genuinely off impact. We didn't canvass, we didn't do we didn't do like a first phase campaign. It's happened, and we've quickly like swung into action for it, and we had all this stuff ready to go anyway. So it looks like a beautifully organized campaign. Actually, what it is a very late second phase campaign. It's actually going to do us really well on this drive for a Grammy. But now we're speaking to like 13,000 people, or out of that 13,000 sort of Grammy voters, those who would vote in the dance category, which is one of the more significant categories because it sets up playing with pop. But there will be some recognition vote for Baauer in that category because of Harlem Shake and what he did to the chart rules and his story. But for us, it's about letting those people know that like he spent 8 years now like becoming like a leader in that genre and doing something different and thinking about the way that dance music should interact with pop and with hip hop. And then he's made this great dance record that's an instrumental record without guests. So I just who knows what's going to happen, man, because it's like my first Grammy campaign and we're working on a period where like the industry's shut down. And it's so interesting to me. It's like learning all these processes for like what these Grammy campaigns ought to look like. So we're in terms of like our learning as like a team, it's been like an insane experience this year.
I'm sure.
Very grateful for it.
I'm sure. Yeah, well, best of luck, man. Like, like I said in our email correspondence, the album's great. And I think, for a lot of the records that end up being nominated for prestigious, awards, like, Best Dance Electronic Album, those albums often feel like moments in time. And that's like the best way that I can describe them is they feel a little bit more, especially for that category. it feels a little more significant. I won't mention other categories that I don't feel are as significant, but
the Grammys has its issues. It's a flawed structure, but it's like I'm really only just understanding it now because look at me, I'm sat in London, like staring at America, trying to work out what it all means, and like, yeah, what that weekend tweet was like, parsing out like how much I understand the decision making there at the committee level of who gets the nom. But for me, it's like I still feel like we're so new to this. We're such rank outsiders that I think it's very cool to be given the acknowledgement, actually.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure. Well, cool, man. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I had a great conversation. I'm sure Sam.
Questions for you.
Yeah, man. Yeah. After we get off this call, feel free to ask me whatever you want, man. I'm totally down. I'm on break right now, so I'm off on vacation. So I'm literally just chilling. I'll probably play some video games later and stuff. But it was
perfect.
It was great. It was great speaking to you and hearing about this label. I'm a huge fan. Sam's a huge fan, and best of luck at the Grammys this year, dude.
Dude, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
I'll
Thanks
see you
for having
later.
me. Peace.
Yeah, man. Like I said, that episode was super awesome, super insightful. Always great to hear the backdrop of a company like LuckyMe that's just been able to slice themselves through the mainstream despite being that quote unquote left field that I spoke of in the intro. And definitely excited that people, made it to the outro and listened to the whole thing, because there's a lot of stuff to learn. And I think, one of the big takeaways that I get from it is no matter what, everything that we do as music business people has to lead back to the art, all the marketing, all the stuff that seems business and totally separated from the art itself has to be tied to it. It's got to start with the artist, and it's got to start with the art. It's got to start with being that fan and growing from that fandom to a place where you actually want to support this artist every single day. So thank you everybody for listening. I want to always give a special shout out to the patrons. We're going to be changing up how we approach Patreon going into 2021, and we're going to be changing some of the tiers. So super excited to announce those very soon. Best of luck to Dom on the Grammy nom, and hopefully Grammy win for Baauer. And as always, leave a review for us. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you didn't like. And everybody have a great 2021.